Good morning, neighbors. It's been a while since I've done one of those as I take a brief break away from doing these on a daily basis during the COVID-19 outbreak. And there was a lot of work that went into those, a lot of study, and I continue to do a lot of studying moving ahead. And it's a little bit of a break for me as I'm between, in the summertime, between classes for graduate school. And so, as I come to you here today, one of the things that I would strongly encourage you to do, since still in this pandemic and still as things begin to open up, of course we need to be considerate of others. While it might be easy for some not to wear a mask as they want to celebrate their freedom that way, we must also be careful for those that makes them incredibly uncomfortable. You know, in an area that we talk a lot about physical health, but we really don't talk a whole lot in the church about mental health. We really go through spiritual health. We don't really talk all that much about taking care of the temples or our physical health all that much. We spend so much time on the spiritual side that one of the areas that gets neglected in a lot of churches is when it comes to mental health. And so I hope that during this time, and I see a rise in numbers, I'm an individual throughout my life that has suffered periods of times of depression and anxiety. In fact, at times it has been crippling for me. And after all of the procedures that I had 5 years ago on my abdomen and my stomach, there was a lot of things that happened that caused some more issues because the majority of serotonin is housed in your small intestine. And now I have no way of accessing that because of the surgeries that I had. And so it really caused a downward spiral. And so as we think of this COVID-19 and we think of all the stresses that are out there, you know, thinking about those who are afraid of getting sick, those who are afraid that they may never find a job again, or if they have any job moving forward as businesses make difficult decisions about being able to make payroll and being able to make budget. There's a lot of things out there when it comes to the areas of mental health. And so what I would encourage you to do is find something that calms your spirit, that calms your soul. And I hope that maybe that you have an area that maybe it's going out in nature. That's where you find that maybe since it's getting warm, it's out kayaking or walking or running. Maybe that's something that you can decompress. And I would encourage you to do that more and more. But whatever it may be, that the stress when it comes to mental health doesn't overwhelm you. It's also important to reach out to people in this time. And this idea of alienating one another and separating from one another, that causes more issue. Those who suffer anxiety and depression often do so in silence. And so it's time that we build those relationships in such a way where we can reach out and say, you know what, I'm not okay. It's nothing wrong with being able to see a counselor or a psychologist to help you through. We're all operating out of our own dysfunction. But one of the things that I do that calms my spirit and it really puts me in a very good place is I love to read. I love to read your traditional books. I still like the smell of books. I like being able to bookmark. I like to be able to mark in the margins some thoughts as I go along. And so that's why I thrive in graduate school, because it's a lot of reading in a very short amount of time, and many times it can be as many as 4 or 5 different books that are going on at one time. But I enjoy that because it occupies my mind to think on things other than all the other stresses that are going on in my life. Of course, it's important to read your Bible. I read my Bible every day, constantly throughout the day. I go back and forth and read different passages. I have my own personal devotion time. I have my own personal study time for creating sermons, and there's a lot of effort that goes into that. But I also just love to read. And so I'm going to share with you some of the books that I am currently reading. And it's not just one book. It's multiple books that I am reading right now. I know that it's going to appear backwards on you, and my apologies for that. But one of the books that I really fell in love with is called Living Gently in a Violent World, and it's by Stanley Hauerwas and Jan Vanier. And it's a wonderful book. You can get it on Amazon. It's not all that expensive, and I know that it's backwards for you, but it's a wonderful book to tell you how, or give you examples on how we can live peacefully when all of this chaos is going on all around us, how we don't lose hope, that we don't lose trust, that we can calm our spirits in all of this, and then comparing to all the violent acts. One of the statements that's made in one of these chapters, Jan Vanier makes a remark saying that in the year 2023 in the country of France, there will be no one in that country that has Down syndrome, because in that country, from what the report was, they either abort them preterm or post-term. And so there's a lot that can go into that. Now, being that this is the year 2020, another really good book that I would encourage you to read, it's called The Politics of Jesus, and it's actually written by John Howard Yoder. And I really would encourage a lot of Christians to take the time and to read this book. It won't take you all that long. It's some 230 pages for you to go over. And it might help you to understand that Jesus didn't minister in a vacuum. That all of the politics that were going on around him, he had to deal with the politics of the Roman government and how that hierarchy worked. It went from Caesar to Herod to Pontius Pilate, who were governors in that area, and how violent of a world that it was. One of the things that I'm going to share this Sunday is when Jesus gives the Beatitudes, that Sermon on the Mount happens after a time when Roman ransacks a lot of the community, and they brutally murder people who don't pay their taxes or are not taking care of things, or that the zealots that are pushing back against the Rome. And so when he says, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor, there's a lot of poverty that's going on during this time because of the oppression by the Roman Empire that's going on. And so the hearers of this would think that he was some sort of radical reformer, talking about how he was going to uproot the kingdom. And that's what the majority of people thought, that when even up to Palm Sunday, really thought he was riding in on that donkey to sit on the throne of David and to rule from there. And so I want you to make sure that you understand the Politics of Jesus is a really good book that I would encourage you to read. Fascinating from my scientific background, from working in hospital labs. I just have a scientific mind. A really good book, if you understand or you like science, is called The Atom and the Genome. And it really talks about, in our DNA, some of the things that, through our history, how there are just fingerprints down through the ages where we can see a central character, a central person, that was ultimately the first man. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book to be able to read if you're scientific and thinking in that way. If you are a Church of God buff, one of the wonderful resources that are out there now, Reformation publishers are coming back out with a lot of the old books that are our heritage from the turn of the 19th or the 20th century and the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. And so if I have some questions that need to be answered, there's some 874 different books that are on Reformation publishers that you can go back. What does the Church of God believe in these areas? Well, then you can go to those and can print out. One of the books that I'm currently working through now is called In the Defense and Promotion of the Traditional Doctrine of Hell. Now, that's a really heavy subject now, isn't it? Something that we don't really like to talk about, but you know, this is a very heavy book. It's over 420 some pages. I'm only halfway through it, but it's really, you know, through the traditions passed down from our forefathers and through the history on how the transition of our understanding of hell has changed. A lot of it has changed since poets like John Milton and Paradise Lost, the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, where we get the 7 deadly sins, things like that. And so it really shows you the transformation of the tradition of the doctrines of hell. What about Enoch Byram? What shall I do to be saved? This is a wonderful book to be able to disciple someone, or for your individual. What does it mean? It goes through the process of not only salvation but sanctification and justification. All of those words, those big words that a lot of people don't know anymore. But perhaps one of my favorite books that I'm going through right now is written by Bruce Feiler, and it's called Walking Through the Bible, The Journey by Land Through the 5 Books of Moses. This is a very powerful book, and I have the hard copy of it. I'm reading through it for a second time, and I'll tell you what, this might help you understand a lot of the positions that we have today, based on the very first 5 books of Moses. Of course, we consider that, the Pentateuch, the 5 books. But those are the books that I am reading, and the whole idea is, outside of the Bible, there are things out there that might give us a deeper appreciation and a deeper application of what we read in the Bible, because the further we get away from the time that the original authors wrote and penned those, the original audience understood for sure and without a doubt what was meant in each of those books, each of those epistles. Even the book of Revelation would have been more properly understood by the ancient than it is to the modern today. And so what I would encourage you to do is, the Bible is the central doctrine. We believe we have no other creed than the Bible itself. But we need a little help along the way because we don't think like the ancient. We have Western philosophy that really strongly influences. We read our Bible with an American bias. And so we really need to put ourselves in the shoes or the sandals of the ancient so that we can understand when Jesus does the Sermon on the Mount what had just happened in the area before Jesus gives that message. And the amount of pain, the amount of hurt, the amount of loss, the amount of poverty. And the majority of Jesus' disciples who followed him were not wealthy. Most of them were the least of these. And that's why a lot of his detractors, even the Pharisees and Sadducees, really looked down upon him as a rabbi, because he spent his time, majority of the time, with what was labeled as sinners. Those who they deemed as lost and not worthy of salvation. And that really, if you pay attention to Jesus and you really understand his message, he's really teaching us about how to be graceful towards humanity in a way that can change the world, rather than being the judge and jury for ourselves, but rather letting God be God and then letting him govern the things in our lives and how we treat one another. And so I hope that this morning that this short little devotion meets you. It's not really a devotion, but I would encourage you to read. Maybe you don't read books. There's a lot of these books that, think of Amazon, they have audio books. There's different ways. Maybe you're going back and forth to work at some distance. Whatever it may be able to deepen your understanding in several areas. Be cautious, of course, of what you're reading, but be able to open yourself up to a deeper appreciation of different positions of some of the things that we believe and we're very narrow-minded about, that we really need to open our mind to the possibility of different appreciations and applications of certain things down through the history. And so God bless you all, neighbors, and I would encourage you. I mean, that's where I find peace during this COVID pandemic. And yeah, I can find time to read and all of these things, but it's that really keeps my mind centered on Jesus as he's the subject, that often loses out on the chaos, the stress, all of these things. Keep him the center of things. Things will play out as they have been planned to play out. We just need to be confident that we serve a God that's fully aware of everything that's going on, and that we can do good. And we can grow individually, and we can do good for our neighbors. And I pray that you take care of yourself, neighbors, and God bless. We'll see ya.